So a couple things. I've got our director of operations, Wendy Trevino, with me tonight, and she's going to be managing the chat. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. If they require me to clarify something I've just said, I'll try to address those as we go along. She's going to write them down. If I don't get to them while we're going through this, I'll get to them at the end when we go through our questions. I will put out the disclaimer that I'm not an attorney and this is not considered legal advice. This is just as a resident of Round Rock and realtor in the area, just trying to provide relevant information. We can all have a discussion together on different things we've experienced and things that we've learned through the process to kind of help each other. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and kind of go through this and be respectful of your time tonight. So as we talk through this process, let me jump in here real quick. Okay, we're going to talk through a couple different things. We're going to talk through what is a tax assessment, how are these values determined, when you're able to appeal, how you can go about the process, and where that can happen. And so let's dive right into the first part of the equation, and that's a property tax equation. So when you pay your property taxes during the year, there's a couple different things that go into that equation. First is the taxable value, which is determined by the appraisal district. And then there's the tax rates, which are set by the different taxing entities. You multiply those together and you get your property taxes. So just kind of going over who's responsible for each part. Again, the taxable values is appraisal district, tax rate, taxing entities. Us as the property owners, unfortunately, are responsible for those property taxes. So let's take a look at the taxable value and how it's determined by the county and the appraisal district. Okay, so assessed value is supposed to equal the market value. And that's the county has a responsibility, or excuse me, the appraisal district has a responsibility to make sure that those numbers match. In fact, their goal is to have the market values at 100% of the assessed values. And that's not everyone agrees with the values that the appraisal district puts out. And that's probably why you're taking time out of your evening to be on this call tonight, because you either don't agree or want to know how to go ahead and protest those taxes. So, but know that that is their job. In fact, they're audited on an annual basis by the state to make sure that they are properly assessing the market value of properties. In fact, if they're not within 5% of the true market value in an audit, then they set themselves up to potentially lose state funding in certain areas. And so that's why it's important to the appraisal districts to get this right, because there are consequences if enough audits fail, that it does start to affect funding to the different taxing entities and the county itself. So one thing I do want to point out is one common misconception is that there's no limit to how much the market value can increase on your property. A lot of times that gets confused with the 10% max if you have a homestead exemption. So that is true. If you have the homestead exemption, the assessed value of your property can only increase 10% in any given year. However, the market value can increase to whatever the market value is, as determined by the appraisal district. In fact, we're going to talk more about this later tonight, but many of you have probably already received your notice of appraised values, and you're going to see a difference, most likely, not in all cases, but if you look at the proposed market value and the proposed assessed value, my guess is that the market value is going to be higher than your assessed value if you're the primary owner and you have the homestead exemption on there. I'm seeing that pretty much across the board, especially in Williamson and Travis County. So again, we're going to talk more about that, but That is a common misconception. There's no limit to how much the market value can increase, only the assessed value if we have that homestead. Okay, so I'm going to take a second to talk through a bill that went into place in 2019 called Senate Bill 2. This was a statewide legislation. Look, it's a 148-page bill that we're going to try to sum up in 5 bullet points. So it's going to be a very broad idea of what this bill was designed to do. But ultimately, the bill was put in place to protect property owners from continuing to pay really high property taxes, and those continuing to increase at what seems like an exponential level if we look over the past 5 to 10 years. So this bill was put in place in 2019. Essentially, the best way to summarize it, it said that the different taxing entities can only increase their revenue by 3.5% in a given year. So let's just take a real basic example. Let's say that the Williamson County had property assessments go up 10%. Then when they certify those values and give them to the different taxing entities, they would have to adjust their tax rates so that their net new revenue was not in excess of 3.5%. Now, a couple other provisions in this bill said it can be a 3-year average. So if a taxing entity did increase at 3.5%, it would just mean that over the course of the next 2 years, it would limit what they're able to do. So there are some provisions that protect the taxing entities, but if they do exceed that amount, they have to go to a special election. In that special election, the taxpayers would vote to approve or not approve the increase. If it's not approved, then it goes back to I think the max 3.5% increase, and the taxing entities would have to adjust accordingly. Now, a couple other provisions in there. This Senate Bill 2 states that if there's a statewide emergency that affects different taxing entities, then they're exempt from this bill in that year. And sure enough, 2020, with the COVID and the effects of COVID-19, it was considered a statewide emergency, which meant this bill that was put into place in 2019 did not affect 2020. And sure enough, the ice storm of February was also considered a statewide emergency that's not going to affect 2021. So, in short, we've had this bill that was put in place to protect property owners that we haven't seen the benefits of yet because of what have been deemed statewide emergencies. Now, I will say, we'll see what happens in October as these rates are voted on. I do think you're going to see a lot more cities and school districts trying to work within these laws and not take advantage of it. We'll see what happens. But one thing I want to point out is you're here tonight to talk through how to go about the process of protesting the assessed value. And I want you to understand that you have rights on both sides of that tax equation that we talked about. So you have rights as a property owner to protest the assessed value. You also have rights as a property owner to protest the tax rates that the different entities are charging. And so we see a big inequality in the amount of attention that's paid to that other side of the equation, the tax rates. For instance, last year we saw 62,000 people protest their taxes in Williamson County, and we had less than a handful of people show up at the different meetings to approve the tax rates. So there's a website on the screen right here, williamsonpropertytaxes.org. I don't know what it is for Travis County, but if you're in the Williamson County area, I really encourage you to take a look at this site, as it has some very helpful information specific to your property. It's going to show you exactly which taxing entities feed into your specific property. And as we get closer, it's going to tell you when they're meeting, what the address is for that meeting, so that you can have equal involvement on that side of the equation as well. This is a new site for me. I actually checked it out just last week. Super helpful. But again, it's going to provide a little more relevant information as we get into the fall, as these meetings start happening. But write this down. I think it's going to be a valuable resource for you in this process. Okay, let me jump ahead here. Okay, so let's talk about the market value and how the county comes up with the market value for your home. One of the questions we commonly get asked is, how does the county determine the actual value of my home? And they have quite a few different ways that they go about getting their information. I will tell you that in the 5 years that we've been doing this, we've seen that their ways of getting information tend to change year to year. In the past, they were heavily reliant on mailing out questionnaires to people who've sold property and people who've purchased property to get them to talk through what they paid for those properties to get data. We saw them use phone surveys. We saw them request information from realtors. Last year, Travis County decided to use the MLS, which was illegal, and they got in big trouble for that. So the county does not have access to the MLS, at least they're not supposed to. But I will say this year, most of the counties in Texas and probably other places around the nation signed a very big deal with TransUnion to get real estate data from TransUnion. Now, I've only known TransUnion as a credit reporting agency, but apparently they have a collection of a lot of data, and that's what the county has used primarily as a primary source this year to come up with the information they have. I can't speak for Travis County, but I know that's what they've done in Williamson County, and it's given them, according to the chief appraiser there, a tremendous amount of access to data that they didn't have in the past. So is that good? Is that bad? I guess, you know, I don't know that it's necessarily good or bad. When you look at what their job is to determine the market value, it probably helps them do that. The bad thing for us as property owners is, with the way the market has been reacting lately and how hot the market is, I don't know that we want them to see what homes have been selling for, because that's kind of an indictment on our properties and the increases that we're seeing in our assessed values. But I will tell you that's how they're getting the data. For many of you that are in Williamson County, you're going to see that when you get your notice of appraised value this year, they're going to actually have in there the market comps that they used within your neighborhood. This isn't across the board, but they've done it to a considerable amount of the properties that they've sent this out to, showing you exactly how they derived your value based on recent sales over the last year. So in the past, and what they would typically do is they gather this information and they would do broad-based increases or decreases to the neighborhoods based on the data subset that they get. Again, this year is a slightly different. Because they have more information, according to them, they were able to not necessarily just do broad-based increases or decreases, but they were able to look at properties on more of a individualized scale, or more of a, within a street or a couple streets. So supposedly, because of that, they were able to get a little more specific with the information. Okay, so notice of appraised value. Like I said, most of you, if you checked your mail in the last week or two, you've probably already received this notice of appraised value. Just a couple things I want to point out, in case you're wondering, this is what it looks like here. There's a couple key pieces that I want you to take a look at on this notice of appraised value. At the top left, you're going to have a quick reference ID. You can use that to file an appeal online. It's also going to show your protest filing deadline below that. For the vast majority in Williamson County is going to be May 17th of this year. But a couple other things I want you to take a look at is next to your name and address to the right, you're going to see if you have any exemptions listed on your home. If it's your primary homestead and you don't have a code HS, a homestead exemption, We're going to talk about that here in just a second, but please make note of that. That's something very important that you'll want to get added to your home if you're not currently using that homestead exemption somewhere else and it is your primary homestead. So below that, you're going to see last year's information. They're going to show you what the market value and assessed value were for last year. And then they're going to show you the proposed market value and assessed value for 2021. And again, like we said earlier, there's a good chance that your market value is going to be higher than the assessed value. And here's what I want to point out with that. If we go into protest, or when we go into protest, I should say, we've got to protest a value lower than the assessed value, not just the market value. So if you want to see any difference in your tax bill, we've got to get them to lower the assessed value, not just the market value. That'll be kind of an important identifier with what we've been seeing in our real estate markets. Going further down, they provided a little more information this year than they have in years past. Really just some quotes about what's happening in the real estate market and why they assess the properties where they did based on different housing reports that they're seeing. And then it's going to go through the different ways you can protest, which we'll also talk about in just a second. But on page 2, those are the different taxing entities that are going to be getting your certified values and have a say in what your overall property taxes are going to be. Those are the ones that, again, we need to be equally attuned to what they're doing as well and become involved in that process when they meet to potentially protest those tax values as well. All right, let me jump back in here. Okay, so if you want to go set up an appointment to meet with the county appraisers in person, just jot down these addresses real quick, depending on where you live. If you're in a county that's not listed here, if you're in Bastrop County, go to bastropcad.org. If you're in Burnett County, I think it's burnettcad.org. If you go to their sites, their address is going to be on there along with their processes for scheduling an appointment. I will say this year that in years past, not last year, but in years past, you could walk in without an appointment for a certain period of time. That's not the case this year. You do need to schedule an appointment. You can still meet in person, but it does have to be scheduled ahead of time. So I get asked a lot, what's the point of appealing, or why is it important? I found that when we can have a successful appeal, it tends to have a compounding effect over time. Let me give you an example. Property last year on the west side of Round Rock, the assessed value came in at $500,000. Client went in, protested, got it moved down to $477,000. Well, this year the assessed value increased the maximum of 10%, but it increased off of that amount of $477,000 instead of $500,000, which essentially saved about $2,300 off the assessed value. At the end of the day, we're talking, not a ton of money, but over time, that's going to have a compounding effect, and it makes it worth at least looking at each year to see if we have a case to appeal the assessed values. The other reason is there's no risk to you. I've heard people say, well, what if they raise my value? They cannot raise your value in any part of this process, not in the informal appeal process, and as of 2 years ago, not in the formal appeal process either. So there is no risk. The county or the appraisal district cannot raise your values during either part of this appeal process. Okay, so again, there's a couple different ways you can go about this process. If you look at your notice of appraised value, again, it's going to tell you how long you have to make this appeal. We talked about not being able to walk in, but rather make an appointment. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can go to their county website and schedule an appointment there. You can call them and schedule an appointment. You can mail in your form and schedule an appointment that way. You can also mail in your form with your appeal already written in. I think it's page page 3 of your notice of appraised value. We'll look at that also. But that page can be mailed into them with your appeal and what you think the value should be. The easiest way is going to be online. If you go to wcad.org and you go to the property search, type in your name, type in your address, it's going to pull up your property. And at the top of when you get to the property page, there's going to be a specific button that says protest online. And it's a process that takes 3 minutes, maybe. So it's a very quick and easy way to go about making an appeal. Now, I will tell you from my own personal experience and from others I've talked to, not many of the online appeals are resulting in any change to values. In fact, when I did it, it just immediately declined it and sent me to schedule an appointment with a county appraiser. So, but that's not the case for everyone. There's people who can protest online and can get an immediate response or get a response in the next day or two, lowering the values. So it's worth trying that way. If it's declined, you still have a chance to make the appeal online, or excuse me, in person through an appointment. This is again, the page 3, the notice of appraised value, where if you want to mail in your appeal, there's 12 different reasons here. You can mark which reason you're appealing for. Again, we'll talk through those. And then at the bottom, it says, what do you think the value should be? Go ahead and put that in, fill out the other information, and mail it into them. And they will send you a response. If they decline that, then part of that response will be a way to schedule an appointment with them to meet in person. Okay, so there's a couple of things I'll point out on this form. Actually, I'll go to the next slide here. Okay, so reason for protest. As you can see in that form, there's 12, 13 different ways you can appeal. The most common is to appeal on the basis that the value that the appraisal district has given you is over the actual market value. Second most common is that the value is unequal compared to similar properties. And finally, that the property description is incorrect. If you're appealing based on the value being over market value, this is a great way to contact us, and we can work through the comps that we have access to through the MLS to show you all of the data. And I'll tell you, when we first started doing this years ago, one mistake that we made as realtors was only picking out just a few properties that made the best case for you to make your appeal. And we found that in doing so, when people went in to meet with the appraisers, they weren't fully prepared for the comps that the appraiser might have access to, and it was really not doing the best service to our clients. So if you reach out to us and ask for MLS sales, we're going to give them to you, but we're going to give you everything that applies. So you can see the good, the bad, and the ugly that makes your case or doesn't make your case, so that you have the information you need to make the appeal when you go in, and you're not blindsided when the appraisers pull out certain comps. That being said, the county trying to find an exact rhyme or reason to the comps that they use, I haven't been able to do it yet. I'll tell you that they have, their system makes adjustments for comps that they pull. I mean, you might be a home in Forest Creek and they're comparing to a home in Star Ranch that has a pool. Well, we know that those are two different property types, but the appraiser might still use that and make adjustments based on age of the home, size of the home. They'll make adjustments to there being a pool or no pool, adjustments to how much land is around the home. You know, so there's really no rhyme or reason to the comps that the appraisal district is going to use, other than they typically try the closest proximity they can get. They're going to consider that a better comp. In fact, when you look at the sales data, some of you might have seen the sales comps that they sent you to come up with your value. They're going to rank those comps on blanking here. Basically, a scale of 1 to 100 on how good of a comp it is, and give more weight to the better ones versus the not as good ones. So yeah, read that bullet point. Understand the county may or may not have the same information. If you get information from the MLS, there's a good chance that you're going to have more information than the county. But you're going to see all of it. When you're appealing that your value is over market value, I have people saying, well, I've got issues with my home that are going to detract from the value that I want to tell the county about. If you're going to do that, those have to be documented, and you have to be able to prove that the damage occurred before January 1st, which is when these values were supposed to determine value as of January 1st. So if you go in and say, I've got a bad roof, I've got things like that, you're going to have evidence, and you're going to have documentation that somehow proves that it was before January 1st of this year. Now, as a side note, one thing I want to point out, if you incurred damage from the snowstorm in February, which I know many homes did, there is a special place on the county's websites, traviscad.org and wcad.org, for you to go in and apply for exemptions based on the amount of damage that you had to your home. And you do have to provide evidence of this, and it is a process of getting approved for the exemption. But if you had damage this year, go to their sites, and you'll see a link on their homepage that specifically talks about filing this type of exemption. Okay, the other thing I hear when we're talking about value is people tell me, well, my home isn't updated like the one that sold down the street. For the most part, that's not going to make a difference as far as the appraisal district is concerned. They're not looking at major updates or not, because for one, they don't really have access to that information. Now, if you're going to appeal and you can prove that the homes that they are using or homes that sold near you had way more updates or were much nicer, and we can do that with a series of photos and things like that, that could make a difference in the value. But as they send it out in the notice of appraised value, they're not taking into consideration what the inside of your home looks like. And that's something that when we send over a CMA, a comparative market analysis, we can dive into that a little deeper about, why certain homes may have sold at a certain price versus where yours is assessed at, just given what type of updates they had, and that type of thing. Okay, so the second most common type of appeal is going to be on the basis of an unequal appraisal. So what this means is if you have a similar type of home in your neighborhood or your area, similar floor plan, similar square footage, similar lot size, all that kind of equals out, and you look and see that one home was assessed at $500,000 and they're assessing yours at $525,000, you probably have a good case for an unequal appraisal. But again, you're going to have to look and make sure that square footage is similar, lot size is similar, that there's no not an extra patio or extra outdoor structure, that type of thing. But if you can find similar homes that have assessed for less, that's a great case for an unequal appraisal. And here's where, going back to one of the previous slides on why appeal, if you have a neighbor that has the same floor plan as you that's been consistent in appealing his property taxes, his assessed value is probably lower than yours. And you can use that as a basis for unequal appraisal. One way to kind of check this, I took that out. So when you go to wcad.org and you search for your property, you'll be able to see, you can see the properties around you. If you know the addresses, you can look and see where their homes are assessed to make that case. So if you're aware of similar floor plans around you, type in those addresses into the county's site, see where they came in from an assessed value, and see if you have a case on the basis of an unequal appraisal. The third most common reason would be if the property description or things about the property are incorrect. Maybe the county has it listed as a 1-story instead of a 2-story, or their square footage is incorrect. Or maybe I saw one case last year where the county had it listed that the resident had a pool. They did not have a pool, and that greatly affects the value from an appraisal district standpoint. So again, make yourself very familiar with wcad.org and that property search tool to take a look at your property and to make sure that everything is in there correctly. One thing I will point out is if you're basing your square footage off of what the builder told you, it is likely going to differ from what the county assessment square footage tells you. The builder is measuring from the inside of the home. The county is measuring from the outside of the home, which, depending on the size of your home, can create 100, 200 square feet difference. And so just know that if there is a small difference like that, that's likely where it's coming from. You can still ask a county appraiser to re-verify the square footage, but that's most commonly what I see is a difference of somewhere between 0 and 200 square feet. And it has to do with how the county goes about calculating square footage versus how builders calculate square footage. Okay, so this is the page that I was referring to that you want to make yourself familiar with. This is on the wcad.org property search. And again, this is going to show you all the different things, taxing entities, assessed value. Towards the bottom here, you'll see the square footage of your home. And below that, it's going to show you the different improvements that it's calculating into that. And so this would be a great way if it shows that you have an extra structure or a pool or something like that that's not actually part of your property. This would be a great reason to appeal the value. On that note, so we talked about exemptions earlier. If you look at your notice of appraised value, or you look at the website, the property search, you don't see any of these exemptions that you should qualify for. If you are the owner of the home as of January 1st of this year, you can apply for a homestead exemption. If you've lived there 10 years and have never put it on there, you have until April 30th of this year to get it on there and have it in effect for this taxing year. So check that, make sure you have it. I've seen many examples of people that have lived in their home for many years that never put the homestead exemption on there, and they've been paying more money than they should have. So it's really important that you check and make sure that exemption is in place if you're eligible for it. If you are applying for a disabled exemption, over 65 exemption, a veterans exemption, those can be done anytime during the year. It doesn't have a deadline of April 30th. Only the homestead exemption has that deadline. Okay, so on the online appeal, we briefly talked through this a minute ago. So their process has changed a little bit, but it is pretty streamlined. And like I said, it's a very easy process. Both on Williamson County is a little faster than Travis County, but both take less than, call it 10 minutes. I did mine in 3, so I think it can be done in 2 to 10 minutes. You're going to use your quick reference ID. In fact, if you click on that button through the wcad.org on your property search, you don't even need the quick reference ID. It already has that in there for you. If you've done it in the past, you just log in. If you've never logged in, you create a login. Williamson County does not require you to submit evidence in the initial step. Travis County does. And in the past, Williamson County has come back typically in some cases with an immediate approve or decline of what you believe your value to be, or potentially a counteroffer. If they come back with a counteroffer and you accept it, you're done with the process. You're good to go. If you decline, then they're going to schedule a formal hearing date for you to go in and plead your case for a different value. But that's the online appeal process. With Travis County, again, their response time is a little bit longer, at least it has been in the past. I haven't tested it this year, but in the past, it's tended to be a little bit longer. And you need to have your CMA ready to go before you file that appeal. Again, Williamson County, you don't need that information. but you might want to check with someone first to get an idea of what you think the actual value should be, so you know what to put in that box when they ask you. Okay, if you're going to an in-person meeting, just a couple things to keep in mind. Be prepared in advance. Don't just show up. Don't just schedule a meeting without looking at any comps. Actually take a look at the comps. Have your own case formed for why you believe your value should be what it is, because the appraiser is going to have their information there, and you're going to bring your information, and y'all are going to talk through that together to try to come up with some type of compromise or get them to agree to your value. That's obviously the ultimate goal. Remember that they cannot raise your value during this process. If during this meeting, which typically lasts about 15 minutes, if you can't come to an agreement, they're going to schedule a formal hearing with the appraisal review board. In most cases, you're going to go directly from meeting with the county appraiser right into that formal hearing. If it's super backed up, there's a chance that they're going to schedule it for a different day, but in the past, they've typically been one after the other. One thing I will point out, just remember the county appraisers are there doing their job. Be friendly, respectful. They're trying to accommodate tens of thousands of citizens on a yearly basis, and just, I don't know, treat them like you would want to be treated in that same environment. I can't imagine having a job where every 15 minutes I got to come in and listen to someone that's not happy with the way we're doing things. But I get it. It's I mean, we're just be respectful about it. I agree with the process of appealing them, but just be respectful in this meeting would be my opinion. Okay, so if you go meet with the appraisal review board, a couple things to keep in mind. If it gets to this, you want to have your evidence already printed out, and you want to bring 5 copies with you. Okay, the reason this is important is because you're going to be presenting to 3 different board members, and you want to make sure that each board member has a copy of your evidence, and you want to give a copy of your evidence to the county appraiser as well, and keep one for yourself. So make sure you have 5 copies of your evidence. Be prepared. Each of you are going to have your chance to make your case. So the county appraiser is going to go first, and then you're going to go and make your appeal. And then after your appeal, you're going to make a motion to have your value lowered to the amount that your evidence supports. And then the board members are going to vote yay or nay, and that decision is final. Again, remember that your value cannot be raised during this process. Okay, a lot of information. I know we kind of breezed through that, but part of that is because I knew we'd have questions and wanted to be respectful of your time and leave some time for questions. I know Wendy has a few written down here. Wendy, you want to kind of tell us some of the questions that we have?
Yeah, so the first one is, how do you decide if the value actually should be protested?
Okay, great question. Just to repeat, how do you decide if the value should be protested? Reach out to us in our chat. We're going to put a link to an online form that you can fill out requesting a CMA, a comparative market analysis. We're going to show you what's sold in your area, and I'll compare that to your notice of appraised value to see if we can make a case for a lower value. You know, a couple of things here with that. You know, when I look at my own notice of appraised value, if you look at last year, there are many places in the county where the assessed value was extremely conservative. Some people actually saw it go down last year, which was not indicative of what we had going on in our real estate markets. But it was a response from the appraisal district to what was happening with COVID to keep their assessed values at a fairly conservative level. Now, I recognize that's not everyone's experience, but that was many people's experience last year, that the increases, if they saw an increase, were fairly mild. And I think what we're seeing this year is the counties, or excuse me, the appraisal district kind of catching up from what was kind of a conservative year last year. And so most people are seeing significant increases this year, especially if you're in Williamson or Travis County, and the market values, and many people are being capped out at their 10% assessed values. But to answer the question, the only way we can know is fill out this form at the end. We'll get you this information. If we feel there's a case for it to be made, we'll point it out. We'll go over it with you, and we'll give you the information to take a look at.
Okay. The next one is more of a comment. They seem to compare the same class code R1, R2, R3 as mine. All other home sales seem not relevant.
Yeah, I hear this every year as people go in and protest with the appraisers not liking the comps that they're using. And again, I wish I had a better answer for how they come up with the sales comps that they do, or why, you know, it doesn't make sense to me all the time. Some of them do, but you know, comparing a home that has a pool to one that doesn't have a pool, and somebody's putting the appraiser's putting an artificial value of say 50 or 60,000 and then making an adjustment accordingly. Well, you know, that's not fair, because a pool could easily have a $40,000 value or $150,000 value depending on the pool itself, right? So there are things in the comps that they use, and if it were me, I'd just be prepared to kind of talk through some of their comps and the ones they're using. The good thing is, like when you do your appeal online or when you schedule one, they're going to go ahead and send you ahead of time the sales comps that they're using. So you're going to go in prepared to talk through the comps that they're using, which they did this last year, but that last year was the first year that they were doing that. So this is really good information, and that's something that we can help you with too. If we see certain comps that they're using, glad to have a conversation and see if we see some inequities in the comps that we can point out in that meeting. So the short answer is you're going to see these sales comps ahead of time to know what they're comparing and be able to speak to their comparisons versus the ones that you're going to provide.
Okay. Next question is, when is the deadline to file an appeal?
For a majority of citizens in Williamson County, it's going to be May 17th. The official answer is look at the notice of appraised value that was sent to you. It's going to have that date on there. And it could potentially be different than May 17th, but for most people, it's going to be May 17th. In Travis County, it's the same. Look at your notice of appraised value, and it's going to give you those dates on there for how long you have to do that.
Okay. Next question is, why are the acres on comps the Wilco folks provided says 0, yet they show the comps with land value adjustments?
If I understand the question correctly, for land to be 0, I'd probably have to look at that specifically, because I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'm glad to, if you'll leave a note or in the comment section, glad to reach out after the fact and take a look at that. The only case where land would be 0 is maybe if it was a condo or something like that, where the land wasn't owned.
It's not the land is equal to $0. They have acres listed as 0.
Oh, they have acres listed as 0. Okay. Yeah, Michael, good question. I don't know the answer to that right now. I'm happy to take a look at it with you after the fact and see if we can figure out what they're doing. But I'm not sure.
Okay. The next question is, will the assessed value necessarily equal increasing the property tax?
Will the assessed value necessarily mean that the property tax is going to, okay. No. So if you saw your assessed value go up, remember there's 2 parts to the equation. So that's the first part. And basically the appraisal district is going to go through this appeal process all the way up until probably late July, early August. Once all appeals are done, they're going to certify the values and they get them over to the different taxing entities that apply to the different properties. And that's when tax rates are set. Tax rates are usually set in the October timeframe. If there has to be a vote on it, that happens in November. But once those tax rates are set, then you have both sides of your equation to figure out what your property taxes are going to be. In fact, you'll notice on your notice of appraised value, the county the appraisal district didn't even put a value of what your property taxes would be this year. They've done it in every year in the past. But because they expect that the taxing entities are going to have to start falling in line because of Senate Bill 2, they specifically did not put values on there. In fact, Senate Bill 2 told the appraisal districts that they're not required to put what their proposed property taxes are until we know exactly what the tax rates are going to be. So just because your assessed value went up does not necessarily mean you're going to pay more in property taxes. Now, but between us, it probably will, but not necessarily.
Okay, next question is, when is it a good idea to hire a professional to protest the value?
Yeah, I mean, many of the professionals are going to work on some type of contingency if they are able to save you money overall on your property taxes or get your assessed value lowered. If you find a company that's willing to do that, I'd say, why not? They're going to go through the process for you, and they're going to have access to comps as well. But I will say you're welcome to do that. It's pretty easy to do yourself. And I would say if you plan on living in this area for a while, learn the process, because it is a fairly painless and easy process that can be repeated year over year once you know how to do it. Now, if it's a time thing and just, I don't want to spend the time, and you're okay with some type of contingency agreement that they're going to get a certain percentage if they win your case, great. Then, that happens all the time, and we see many people do that. Personally, I value my time, but it's real easy to make an appeal. And some years I look at the comps and I go, I don't feel like I have a valid case, and so I kind of leave it alone. But I'd say every other year I feel like I have a valid case to get it lowered and go through the process. And it takes me a total of maybe 2 hours of my time when it's all said and done.
All right, next question is, we just closed on our home on January 10th and assessed value went up 16%. We can't claim homestead exemption because we didn't own house on January 1st. The value is still less than our purchase price. Anything we can do?
Okay, the value your purchase price is still below where they have it assessed. Probably not. Again, we can look at the comps. If you're in the reverse situation where you have a closing disclosure for closing last year, and you can show that you paid less than where they assessed your property, then that's going to be your best evidence. And vast majority of the time, outside of some certain time adjustments that they might make depending on when you purchase the home, your best evidence to get the value adjusted. If you paid more than they're currently assessing it, you're probably not going to have a great case for lowering that value. But that depends on what other homes around you sold for. So potentially it'd be hard for me to say without looking at it specifically. With you closing on January 10th, you're going to have to file your homestead between January 1st and April 30th of next year, because you do have to be the owner of the home as of January 1st.
Don't have is what he paid for the lot. That was it.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. If you can hear me, say that one more time. Okay.
Next question is, realtors often provide comps which show a price per square foot based on comp sales prices. Wilco always seems to disregard price per square foot. Why is that?
Yeah, I know that they certainly have in the past, because again, that's a good reminder. Next year I'll print out the sales comps that they use and put it on a slide here to show you that they have their own formulas for coming up with their values and all their different adjustments. And Michael, you actually referenced it earlier, just the different, they'll add money for a porch, they'll take away money for square footage, they'll add, they have their own adjustments that they do, and price per square foot just isn't one of those adjustments. 2 or 3 years ago, I'd say price per square foot wasn't the best way to look at, comparable sales. It's becoming, working on the other side of it of helping people sell their homes right now, I can say it's being used a lot more than it has in the past because we're seeing people get higher dollars using that sales comparison, the price per square foot sales comparison. But from a county standpoint, no, they historically haven't used that. I still think you can bring it up in your appeal to them if you have a good case, but understand that there's pretty big, at least historically, there have been pretty big inequities in price per square foot when you break down a 1-story versus a 2-story. And there's many things that can make the price per square foot vary. Again, we're seeing that term used a lot more in selling people's homes, but I don't know that it'd be super beneficial to use the price per square foot when we're trying to appeal for a lower value right now.
So I have also found they don't use the square foot because it's not the only factor, including the construction quality.
Yeah, someone brought up construction quality to me earlier this afternoon, and I'll admit I'm not super familiar with that from the county. I do have a good resource to reach out to, and I'll ask him to get a little more clarifying information on construction type and construction quality and how they determine that and what type of adjustments they make for that. But I apologize, I'm not super familiar with that or how they come up with that.
Ryan, I can help with that. What I found is if I try and go in there with the square footage complaint, what they do is they look at the other one that you're bringing up. And if you say I've got 2 houses identically square footage wise, just hypothetically 3,000 square feet, and one is got an entire stone fascia outside versus one with hardy board and asphalt driveway versus one that's got stone or some other form of, they're going to look at that as a quality difference, and therefore the square footage is irrelevant.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that information. That's new to me, and I guess in some regards it makes sense, but that seems like it would be really difficult to make that determination from limited data. But if that's what they're doing, that's what we need to know.
Next question is do you have any advice for those who will reach the over 65 exemption soon?
Yeah, the day you turn 65, go on to wcad.org or traviscad.org and file that exemption. You can do it anytime in the year. In fact, I believe, send me, whoever asked that question, send me your email and I'll send you a better answer, but I think you can do it anytime in the year that you're going to turn 65. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. If someone's on here and can speak to that, feel free to correct me. But I think you can apply for that anytime during the year that you're going to turn 65.
Well, if you've been in the house since January of that year. But we had
Yes, ma'am. January 1st of that year. Yes, ma'am.
All right, the next question is, we refinanced late 2020. Would the appraisal done then be relevant to the market value of the assessed or the assessed value?
Possibly. Yeah, I'd say it's great evidence. You got a paid appraiser going in, providing, and their job is to provide market value as well to the lender. So I'd say that's great evidence, especially if it makes a case for a lower assessed value. I'd find that similar to the evidence of providing a closing disclosure, which is also extremely good evidence. So I'd say, and for December 2020, if the appraised value is lower than where they assessed it, I'd say you have a really strong case.
I'm gonna look at our appraisal.
Say that one more time. Okay. Well, that's the questions we have. If there's other questions, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask those. If it's real property specific, go ahead and put it in the comments and we'll try to reach out to you via email. Again, there's going to be a link in the comments. Is it a jot form, Wendy?
I've put it there already.
Okay. If you need us to run a CMA for you, Give us, understand that it might take 7 to 10 days, depending on how many requests we get, but we're going to do our best to get those out in a timely manner, as well as answer any specific questions we have for you or you have for us. Again, our goal is to be a resource for the community. Are there any other questions at this time?
We have another one.
Okay.
If currently refinancing, we cannot use the closing disclosure for protests, correct? As it's not in 2020.
I would say the county is still using comps from January, February, March of this year. So I don't know why you couldn't also. They're going to do a time adjustment on that, just like they would the comps that they used from, say, a month ago that they might use. They're going to time adjust it back a couple months. But I would say that you can still use that.
That is it on the questions.
Well, thank you everyone for taking a little bit of time out of your evening. I hope it was informative. I know we probably didn't answer all the questions, and so if there are, again, reach out to us. I'm glad to do a little more research and reach out to our contacts at the appraisal district to see what we can get answered. But hope y'all have a great evening, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.